Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're close to the bottom of page 1465. 1465. And discussing using the words of Ayin Beis, the Seder v'derech haveda b'birur v'tikun t'nefesh habamis. The manner, the order, the process, the dynamics of the work of refining and improving, or many different words for the word tikkun. Sometimes it means repairing, but it could also mean to beautify. But regardless, tikkun, the birur tikkun of the animal soul. And how is the process? It's how the nefesh elikis, the divine soul, engages with the animal soul. Essentially, in simple psychological terms, we all have within us a selfish side, the ego that's focused on survival and existence and serving our own self-interest and needs. And then there's another side that we have, which is our divine side, the transcendent voice. And there's a battle between the two. And that battle is won by the nefesh elikis, so-called educating and training the animal soul to also appreciate the divine godliness and transcendence. And by that process, it's firstly through the seichel of the nefesh habamis, what we call shemen, oil, the oil in the analogy of the nair of the candle. And through the seichel, once the seichel of the nefesh habamis is engaged, it is receptive to be influenced also on an emotional level, when it experiences the emotions of the divine soul as it feels the deep love for godliness. So the emotions of the animal soul also get stimulated in turn. And as he said, we need both elements. We need to speak to the mind, because if you don't have the engagement of the mind, if there's no asaga seichel tivi, so even if the nefesh elikis understands well godliness, lo yiflu min uma, it won't have any impact on the animal soul. It won't move from its place. It may weaken it, it could subdue it, but it's not going to have real impact. On the other hand, if there's only moichin, and there's no ispilus in the nefesh elikis and its midas, so that too, lo yiful gamken al midas nefesh habamis, even if the nefesh habamis understands it, because it remains detached from its personal feelings. Nefesh habamis has no problem feeling hungry or thirsty or indulging in any of its other needs, like he described earlier, whether it's the needs to make money or the needs to find honor or glory in life. So there, the emotions of the nefesh habamis are very engaged. So if you want the emotion of the nefesh of the animal soul to be engaged with godliness, you have to have both elements. The mind of the nefesh habamis has to be engaged, and it also has to experience an emotional experience. If the nefesh elikis remains abstract, or in a sense detached, then it's not going to have that impact. I'm summarizing essentially the paragraph on page 1465. The parentheses, he added the idea that there's a yisn, there's actually, when the nefesh habamis understands something, it actually can impact emotions in a way even faster than the divine soul. And we had discussed that at length, what that means, because the nefesh habamis is essentially a seichel around midas. The nefesh elikis is a divine entity, so in a sense it could experience the divine and not necessarily have an emotional experience in a tangible way. We're not talking about the hidden emotions in a revealed way, but the nefesh habamis, he says, because the nefesh habamis does think in terms of personal interest, and that already makes it connected to its midas. Obviously, it's not the impact of having avos Hashem. For that, you need the divine souls of influence, like he explains. But that you can have a certain impact on the nefesh habamis, that's possible, even if the nefesh elikis is primarily focused on the intellectual side, not on the emotional side, as we discussed. I'm just summing up what we had learned. So, in other words, when nefesh habamis begins to appreciate and understand the divine, it does weaken, or the way he put it was likeich memenes achais minyanim gashmi. it does draw out, it does drain the nefesh habamis a bit from its total exclusive passion in material things. Like he said in Yiddish, but then at the end of the day, you still need the ava of the nefesh halikis. Like he said, it's not enough just the intellectual side of it, and that is what causes the ava to also affect the nefesh habamis, and that's what it means that the shemen, in the example of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the soul of man, of a human being, is the flame of God. What's the flame indicate? A flame indicates it's a flame of God, so it's godly flame. However, it consists of a few things. The wick of the divine soul is drawing the oil, the fuel from the animal soul, meaning that the divine soul is influencing the mind of the shemen, which could have been used for something else entirely, for its own interest, and now the shemen is feeding the psila of the nefesh halikis. So the way he put it is that bechinas haseichel hativi nefesh nimshach achar haseichel the nefesh halikis. Yeah, the natural intelligence of the animal soul is drawn after the intelligence of the divine soul, and that means that the nefesh halikis is mamshich eirei haliki. It's mamshich, it's divine light. Through its understanding and comprehension of godliness, also in the natural intelligence of the animal soul. And then, so that will automatically also affect that the nefesh habamis should have love, and that's b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzrecha. V'haftas Hashem alekecha, so it's avos Hashem, love of God, b'chol levavcha, with both sides of the heart, means with the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The nefesh habamis is also involved. As I pointed out in the previous class, this goes very much hand in hand with what we learned at length earlier about the process of how we grow from the bottom up, mutfe, murgish, muskel, how a child grows into an adult and their emotions develop and mature. This includes also the emotions shouldn't just be focused on self-interest, but be focused also on that which is beyond yourself, something transcendent, ultimately godliness, and the levels that we grow all the way from natural, reflexive, behavioral emotions, all the way to developed emotions, to cognitive emotions, and then the emotions and the mind both can experience something far greater, the divine that goes all the way up to arich, like we spoke about, the higher levels of transcendence and that go beyond existence. So that's how the process grows. That's how we grow. When we're young children focus on their own needs. As adults, we're expected to grow. That's the Avodas Hashem of a person, that your life is not just centered around yourself, but it's around the purpose of your life and the cause. Why were you sent here? What God wants of you. And ultimately, the deepest levels of yearning and longing to connect to the core, to the source itself. And of course, in all this, in many, many levels, which is very much part of everything we've been learning. Here he's just connecting it to the understanding of how the process works, how the nefesh halikis and nefesh habamis work in the context of a ner, of a candle. And that's where we stopped. So I'll just do one more general review, though I've done it a number of times in previous classes, but it's always worthwhile refreshing ourselves. That all this obviously comes part of the central theme of Ayin Beis, interface, the interface between existence and the divine. And here it really plays itself out, if you really think about it, on a microcosmic level, where it really plays itself is in our own internal lives. Now, what is your life going to be about? God or yourself? Now, we don't want to annihilate the person, and we also don't want to compromise the divine component. Hence, we need interface. So the interface works this way. The neshama, which is a divine entity, rooted in the highest levels that we learned, doesn't remain there. It comes down and mislabish, not in passing. It internally manifests within a body and animal soul, goes through many, many levels. The soul travels through the whole Seder Shtalshlus, as we've learned. Tahirihi, Shamashanasatbi, Tahiri, Atabarasat, Yetzatat, and Nefachtabi, until it comes down into the state that we called earlier Shcherani. It's dark. It means the soul itself is saying, I'm in a dark place. And yet, that's exactly the interface. It engages with the animal soul, which is, the animal soul represents existence. The divine soul represents the divine. There you have the interface on a personal level. So every time you battle, every time you wage war, every time you deal with any type of challenge between your two voices, what are you going to do now? Take care of yourself or do something for the higher cause? You are essentially manifesting this interface that is the purpose of all of existence. So this is not this is not just an avodah of what we've learned. This is the heart and soul of the whole theme of Ayin Beis, and for that matter, all of Chassidus. How do we bring God into our lives? And here we mean God. We don't just mean in an abstract way. We mean a life that is driven not by self-interest and the self. We all know what that means. You look at the world around us. I mean, the prevalent theories, the prevalent way of looking, the prevalent perspective on life is essentially the Darwinian, or I like to call it the Freudian Darwinian model of survival of the fittest, or the id. It's driven by our own personal pleasure. That's what most people drive their lives. What will give me pleasure? For now, for tomorrow, short term, long term. And it's usually connected to material things of this material world. The whole purpose of why we came to this world was to make a dira b'tachtenim, to not allow ourselves to be seduced by the materialism, but to, on the contrary, transform it, not to escape it and not to avoid it, but to engage with the material world, the divine soul engaging with the material life that we live and elevating, refining it, what we call here, birur v'tikkun nefesh habams. In volume 2, we actually refer to nefesh habams, that's how the tzimtzum manifests within us. I have to find somewhere in the middle of volume 2. I'll look it up later. But it's very interesting. So the whole idea of transforming the tzimtzum, which we talk about so much on a cosmic level, actually comes down to, what does it mean to you, the tzimtzum? The nefesh habams is tzimtzum within you. Because the nefesh habams conceals the divine, just like the tzimtzum conceals the Ein Sof. On a cosmic and a broader level, macrocosmic level, on a microcosmic level, it's within each of us. We experience it every moment in our lives. So when we deal with and transform that tzimtzum, which is exactly what we're learning about now, we're essentially, on our level, we are then affecting all of existence, all the way on a cosmic level, transforming the tzimtzum itself to be able to experience the seamless unity of pre-tzimtzum reality. In other words, it's similar to it's the idea what we talked about, kol hamayrik be'echad, which was what? The contemplation, the elaborate contemplation on echad, that though we live in a material world, a fragmented world, and all the details, we begin the process from the bottom up of extrapolating and recognizing that everything in existence comes from a divine source. That divine source, like divine speech, is rooted in divine thought. The thought is rooted in divine faculties, all the way to Keser, to the Ayin of Keser, all the way to the highest levels, all the way before the Tzimtzum, all the way before even God envisioned existence. I said it very quickly. All these levels were enumerated and elaborated upon. So when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, we're doing exactly that. We're allowing ourselves to contemplate, and that leads to what? To V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. There you have the Hizbonenus is the Shema. The Ava, the second, he said we need both. The Ava is the feeling of love, and both of those impact the animal soul. B'chol levavcha b'shnei yetzarecha. So you see, if you start thinking about it, what we're learning here is really tying together everything we've been learning till now. I'm not going through every detail because there's so much to cover, but that just gives I'm using some few highlights of connections. So if you really go further back, you start seeing that all this comes together. And of course, there's the key last point, which we're going to learn about more now, is that it's not just that the divine soul transforms the animal soul in turn actually draws out even more strength from the divine soul that it would never have had above. That's why Shcheira Ani Nova, I am beautiful, and a beauty that's even deeper than the love of Bnei Yerushalayim, which is the neshama says they are Natsilis. For the reason being, because the great thirst that is generated dafka in a state of darkness, which ultimately takes us the neshama back to its root source, which is higher than Gilui altogether. So like we learned that dafka below, we connect to the etzem that's even higher than the Giluyim, and even the Giluyim are like a midbar, shmama, like a desolate wilderness, a desolate, lifeless compared to atzmus. And all this is part of this work that we're talking about. So if you really go slowly through it all, you have here is a very elaborate step-by-step process of how we transform ourselves and the world around us, the material world, into a home for the divine, connecting the interface of the highest levels of Elikus with the lowest levels of existence in a way that's integrated. One does not compromise the other. So initially, obviously, you have to go step by step. You can't just jump into having both of them in full glory. But as we grow and we acclimate ourselves and we learn and we train and we mature, each level that we reach is a deeper connection between these two. And each of us have to determine and define how that plays itself out in our personal lives based on our personal situation. Okay. What else can I say here? One more thing before we continue, that as pointed out, a lot of this, especially around the Ner, is based on the Maimer Miyak Hashem Alekenu Hamagbi L'Sheves from the Alter Rebbe, printed in Torah and explanation in Torah and elaborated upon by the Mittler Rebbe. And I've already given the pages, and it's also been posted, so you can check that out. And I'll be referring a lot more to it as we continue learning now, because especially the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, but also the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, really elaborate very much on this discussion, including the understanding what we learned earlier, that the neshama, when it transforms, the divine soul transforms the animal soul, it's the neshama's very own power that it does that. But it does it with the siyua and the support of the malachim, of the angels, and the other dimensions of the cosmic order that help the neshama do its work. And of course, all this will lead to ner mitzvah v'teireh, the role of mitzvahs and the role of Torah, which mitzvah is also compared to ner, a candle, and Torah is, of course, even higher than that, ur. So all that is the basis of a lot of what we're learning here from Torah and the explanation in Torah and then the Mittler Rebbe's long 70-page discourse on this. So I'll be referring much more to that later as we connect all the dots here, as it all comes together here. Okay. And finally, just to lay the lay of the land, remember page 1350 is a key, we'll call it watershed page, maybe that's the right word, a key juncture in the Ayin Beis structure, because that's where the Rebbe Rashab moves over from Mamata Lamaila, the interface from the bottom up through Tefillah that began all the way 550 page earlier in middle of volume 2, and begins Mamaila Lamata Torah, Torah. How Torah is brings down from the top down the interface, but they're both connected because they both need each other. Torah, Tefillah, and now we have mitzvahs in the whole pot as well. So all this will soon come together, and I'm being very precise with this because being that the Ayin Beis the Rebbe Rashab did not finish writing it, we want to really see what he says and what we need to draw out from these sources that I'm mentioning to be able to fill in any gaps that may not be fully spelled out by the Rebbe Rashab. So we'll be doing that as well. Okay, so that's somewhat of an overall summary. I didn't do a full summary of all of Ayin Beis. We'll do that other times. But the rest you can connect the dots and see how it all connects all the way back to the beginning of Ayin Beis, Keser, the idea of interface from the highest levels of the divine and transcendent to the divine as it manifests within existence, or sometimes known as Seviv Klam and Mal Klam and Makif and Pnimi, and now even deeper, reaching all the way to the Esem. So it always comes down to 3 levels. Makif and Pnimi are like the two levels of the divine. One is within existence, one is higher, and then the Esem, which is beyond both and joins them together in a full seamless fusion. Okay. So with that, unless anyone wants to clarify anything or ask anything, the overall picture here. I'm ready to start learning where we're up to.
Rabbi,
On the bottom of page 1465. Yes.
I asked, are any of those mimers translated, or are they all just in Hebrew?
The Torah or Mimer may be translated. I don't think so, but it may be. You have to look it up. The Mittler Rebbe's Mimers, I'm almost sure is not.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I've been translating it myself here. I'm drawing upon it. I'm drawing from it. So.
Okay. Thank you.
The watershed page of 1350, where it changed from, the Rebbe changed direction, so to speak, from milamata lamila to lamila milamila lamata. Shouldn't it have been the other way? Or I mean, not shouldn't have. Obviously, the Rebbe does what he does, but wouldn't the seder properly be that in order to do milamata lamila, we need to know, we have to have Matan Torah. We have to understand from God how to serve Him. What our avodas Hashem is in davening. We learn davening from Torah, how to daven properly. So why did the Rebbe start with milamata lamayla? Wouldn't it normally, you would think that you would start from milamayla lamata, because to learn how to do milamata lamayla.
Well, it's a fair question, but when you learn it inside, you don't have the question. It's very understandable. I don't know if you were around when we started that page.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but I would refer you to when he starts on page, I'm looking at volume 2 now, on page 996, sorry. Tov Kuf Tzadik Vav is 996. When he starts talking about V'yadaita Yem, remember that's a very critical verse. V'yadaita Yem v'shavesa levavecha ki'avayu alikim b'shamayim mimal la'oretz mitachas ein oid, right? So when he starts discussing on page 996 and 997, he lays out the Mamayla Lamata, Mamat Lamayla right there. And does say exactly that Matan Torah was Mamayla Lamata, but the main Aveda is Mamat Lamayla. I mean, you go back to the beginning of the whole discussion of these two methods, which goes back now to page 790. 790. You'll also, when you read that, you'll see right away. When you read it, you'll see that it's the only way to really go about it, because the Rebbe Rashab is laying out what we should be doing. He's not laying out how God created existence. That he already did. The first volume of Ayin Beis, the first volume, you could say first volume and half of not a half, a third of the second volume. But here he's starting to talk about the process of what we're supposed to be doing. And when you read it, you see that it just makes total sense. Had he gone the other way around, we'd be missing the whole process of what we're supposed to do. And this is all about the transforming the tzimtzum and so on. If you start mamay lamata, and the question is asked, how do you transform the tzimtzum? You don't do it mamay lamata. You do it umat lamayla, because the tzimtzum is a dark state. And you have to start from the tzimtzum and work your way up. Then you come to discover there's another approach, which is Torah Mamay Lamata. Anyway, it's when you read it, it becomes very clear that this is the only logical way to structure it. Secondly, I will just say this. The bottom line is, the message to us is always Mamata Lamayla. Everything starts from you doing something. You wake up in the morning, even though there was a Matan Torah, and even though God returned your neshama to you, and you have many blessings, if you're not ready to make a move, nothing's going to happen. God is not going to do it for you. I mean, there are moments of grace where you can get a gift from above, and there's a time of Sefiros, and we have a moment of inspiration. But bottom line is, everything starts in life with human initiative. So much of the foundation of the Rebbe's entire Nesius leadership, that I'm not going to do the job for you. You need to do the job. You need to do your work. Then you will receive all the strengths you need, and so on and so forth. So so that just adds to the whole thing being the focus. Finally, I'll say this. They're not mutually exclusive. I mentioned a number of times. In the Mamayla Lamata, there's Mamat Lamayla. In Torah, there's also our effort. And in Tefillah, there's also Mamayla Lamata. And if you really learn it, it's all interwoven. In broad terms, or broad strokes, it's one is from the top down, bottom up, but they both have each of within each other. So anyway, at the end of the day, could the Rebbe Rashab done it the other way? He could have, I'm sure he could have, and it would have been very eloquent and beautiful. But the way he did it is very, if you read it properly, you see, it's like very, very logical and makes total sense.
Okay, my second question, thank you. Second question is, this battle.
Sorry?
This battle, second question is, thank you, is the battle between the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamas to transform it from self-preservation, from the selfish gene, as that book talks about, and
Dawkins,
survival of the fittest. Is the concept to change the Nefesh Bahamas that it's no longer is concerned with self-preservation, that it be just theocentric, so to speak, or to change what self-preservation means for the Nefesh Bahamas, meaning that convince the Bahama that for its self-preservation, it needs to be theocentric. You see my question? One is to keep it.
Yes, I understand the question. Yeah. Okay. I would give you the way I would put it is this. If you remember, we talked the Yesh and Nivra is rooted in the Yesh Amiti. In other words, the fact that we feel that we have no source is rooted from Atzmus, who actually has no source, right? Mitziusim Atzmuse. So the goal is that the body and the animal soul, which are a Yesh, the Neshama is not a Yesh. The Neshama is an Ayin. The Neshama feels godliness all the time. It's like Ur. It could be concealed from our consciousness, but the Neshama on its own is a divine entity. The Guf and the Nefesh Abamis are divine creations, but they don't feel divine on their own. They feel, as a matter of fact, independent of everything, independent consciousness. So the goal is that which is the root of all the self-interest and the self-preservation, as you put it, and all that comes from. The goal is to come to understand that the real reason I feel like a self and an independent entity is because I come from an Atzmus that's a true independent entity. So the Guf and Nefesh Abamis in their ultimate experience will be a consciousness that I exist, but I am essentially a reflection of the divine ego, if you wish. The Neshama is not a reflection of ego. It's a reflection of divine bittul, of selflessness, of going away out of yourself. The Guf and Nefesh Abamis is a state of ego, but it could be its own ego, or it could be the ego of God, so to speak, where the Nefesh Abamis and the Guf recognize, which will be after Tchias HaMesim in the future, that we are here to express Atzmus in this world. That's briefly the point. And that in turn will teach the Neshama things the Neshama did not know on its own, like we learned about the body feeding and nourishing the soul with that awareness. Like what we said, that Dafka below teaches all the higher levels that everything is really lifeless without Atzmus. Who teaches that? Dafka ein arech be'elam haza. Only in this world can we come to that awareness, because this world is so far away from God and its consciousness. It teaches us that God must be something that's completely beyond all forms of divine, all forms of revelation. That's part of the picture here. So definitely not to annihilate, or to put it in different terms. You know, when we eat today, you eat or drink. So you eat a drink. You're hungry, you're thirsty, and hopefully you make a bracha, and you eat and drink l'shem shamayim. That's beautiful. Okay, but it's not really transformed. It means you've directed your physical needs to understand it's l'shem shamayim. You're not just eating to indulge and satisfy your hunger. You're also eating in order to build strength. You do with strength, you do a mitzvah, you do a kind deed, you give tzedakah, etc. But there's a deeper level, that when a person's hungers something, their neshama is really hungering for the divine spark within it. So so I would add one more thing, that the guf and nefesh habamis la'asalove, when they'll be completely refined, will know that self-preservation was never the end. That which I was drawn to, either for success or to be wealthy, or because I was hungry, was really a deeper spiritual longing to connect to God. It just manifests itself in a gashmistic way. That's just an additional element I would add to.
Thank you.
It's like I pointed out several times when the Rebbe by Farbrengen, so a regular Shabbos Farbrengen, Rebbe didn't wash, he made kiddush, and he had some cake in a plate, and right after kiddush, he would take a little piece of cake, not much, a crumb or two. By the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe would eat up more cake, because you need to eat enough to be able to make a bracha achreina. If you only eat a few crumbs, it's not enough. You need to eat more. So you would eat, I don't know, you'd eat enough for the shear to be able to make a blessing after at a bracha, blessing afterwards. So I used to always think that, here there you see the difference between a tzaddik and the rest of us. We make a bracha in order to be able to eat, and the Rebbe was eating in order to make a bracha. So I would say that for someone who's completely saturated with godliness, they don't ignore the physical world. They don't fast. They're not ascetic, but they see the physical world as simply fuel. Actually, let's use this word, as shemen, fuel for the divine. Simply that. So you're engaging, but you completely don't see it as an independent thing. All it is to fuel your neshama and your purpose in life. So I just thought that would be a nice way a good way to express it. Like the Tzemach Tzedek told his wife, it's better to eat in order to daven than daven in order to eat, because the doctors had told her that she should eat right in the morning when she wakes up. So she would daven quickly because the doctor said she needs to eat. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, why don't you eat first and then daven? And explained it's better to eat in order to daven than to daven in order to eat.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate that explanations.
Okay, good. So now let's move on. We're 7 lines from the bottom of page 1465. V'yesh shleimer. The line begins, the nefesh halikis is spoil. So just to point out that the next lines are going to be somewhat brief, a little dense, but the Rebbe Rashab is relying that remember what we learned in the last pages. So a lot of what he's saying is really like a summation of everything he's already said till now. So I'll try to flesh it out, unpack it a bit, but just keep that in mind as we learn here. So it's not like new, it's material that has been discussed, but he's bringing it together now in this context of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. And the Nefesh Lekis and Nefesh Habamis, the Shemen, and the oil and the wick. I do want to say one thing, because I don't know if anybody asked me that, but it jumps out at us. One more point I want to make. In some Maimorim, the example of the candle is used very differently. Even the Alter Rebbe himself, in that same Torah in another Maimer Chanukah, he actually uses the wick as an example for Nefesh Habamis and the Shemen for the Nefesh Lekis. So in case you're wondering, I do the same in the book Torah Meaningful Life, on the first chapter, Body and Soul. So there, I say the soul is like the flame, and the wick is like the body, which makes sense when you think of the wick in context of the flame. The flame rises, the wick grounds it. So it does explain in some Maimonic Chassidus that the wick is like the animal soul being dissolving and being turned into the physical wick is becoming a Ner Hashem. So I want to point out there are different Maimorim that talk about this in different ways, which is not a contradiction. It's simply different ways to explain the example. And as I said, the Alter Rebbe himself explains it both ways. I've not found anyone reconciling and there's no need to. So not everything in Chassidus has to be reconciled, because each place explains it in its own way. I just wanted to point it out, because this is a little, initially it seems counterintuitive. You think the shemen, everyone would think right away, shemen, oil, godliness. And the wick you'd think is being like the physical wick, seems much more physical than the shemen is far more subtle. And a wick is like made out of real material. But as we see here clearly in Torah, the explanation is that the wick is the nefesh halakis as it manifests in physical body. That's why it's a wick. And the shemen is what feeds it, in this case, the nefesh habamis. The shemen, like he explained at length, the shemen of klipas noiga, we talk about here. So I just wanted to make that point in case anybody was wondering. So it is discussed other places in different ways. Fine.
But if I may just add to that, is in the reverse order, the wick is never consumed, which means that the oil is what's consumed. As looking at the physics behind candle burning,
that's correct.
and
Which works very well here,
yeah,
because
yes,
you want the nefesh habamis to be consumed, not the nefesh halakis. Exactly.
because at the end of a fire, when you use a fire, the wick is still existing and the oil is gone. Meaning the wick is eternal, so to speak. It's there as a way of mamshich, of bringing of the nefesh habamis and transforming it. And in the physics of lighting a candle,
I understand.
The
Yeah.
liquid becomes a vapor. It vaporizes. The fire is from the vapor. It turns from a liquid to a gas. It transforms yesh of a liquid to a more ephemeral.
Which works very well with this example. I understand perfectly. Yeah, good.
Not to turn this into a Fabrian, but I think it says in either the Alter Rebbe or the Middle Rebbe's Mimers or both that, and even here maybe on Beis, I'm just going to read all three, so I forget who says what. But the wick expires without the shemen. So the wick is the nefesh halakis in the mashal of Ner Hashem Neshmas Adam. The wick is the nefesh halakis, and so without the shemen, which is sechla tivi, the wick will burn up very quickly, which makes perfect sense because the whole purpose of the neshama coming down here is for all the berurim and the elevation of nefesh behema, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's not going to engage nefesh behema, if it's not going to engage materialism and this low, there's no purpose for it here. So it will expire. It's not going to disappear per se. Maybe from our perspective, it goes back to its source. So the wick doesn't. It's not eternal, Eliezer. I mean, the neshama is, but the materiality of the wick in this world expires without the shemen, and that makes perfect sense. It's here as long as the shemen is there to feed it, and if it's not going to be fed by that, it's going to be
but here's the interesting paradox. If there was no shemen, you're right, the wick would burn out and would completely be consumed by the fire. Interesting, the shemen protects the wick from ever disappearing. So when it finishes burning, the wick remains standing. But it's absolutely correct. In Torah, he does say that if the wick was alone and you lit a wick, let's say you lit a piece of cotton or some other wick, thread, and there was no oil, the thread would be completely burn out, and not just burn out, it would completely be incinerated. It's interesting that is the oil that also protects the wick, and the wick remains this type of channel that just absorbs the oil, and at the end of the day, when it finishes burning, the wick remains standing. So it's true in Torah, he doesn't talk about what does that mean that the wick remains, but it's interesting. Maybe there is more in Mittler Rebbe's mind, but I would have to look about that. But yes, the points are all correct. What everybody said here is accurate. So there's different aspects of it. That's all.
And that last point, I thought it's a nice point. But that last point about if it's in the oil and it protects it, so to speak, is probably what the Rebbe is going to talk about now. That the nefesh Bahamas gives an aliyah to the nefesh.
Oh, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Is keeping the wick alive, so to speak, keeps it in its eternity through being protecting it, so to speak.
The more you think about the example, the more you see it's how profound it is. Yeah.
And if I may add one more point, I looked up how does the wick draw the oil into the wick and to expired, and it brought up 2 points that I've never heard of before in physics. There's called the adhesive force and the cohesive force. And the cohesive force is the shemen. it has cohesive. It sticks together. The oil sticks together. Water, liquid will stick together. By being brought into the wick, the adhesive force of the wick is overpowering the cohesive force of the water, or the oil in this case, and it allows it to be consumed. And I found that very interesting. That so the mashal is how do we transform the Shem and the Nefesh Bahamis into.
So you're saying is something like the divine soul breaks apart the so-called cohesiveness of the animal soul that's focused on itself. Basically.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting, right? And
it's like weakens it. Yeah, exactly right. It's good. It's a very good point.
Very nice point.
As a matter of fact, it reminds me in Hayom Yom he brings the Mittler Rebbe said that when two Jews come together, is two nefesh alikis on one nefesh abamis. So the Rebbe asked the question, why? Is two nefesh alikis against two nefesh abamis? Two people have two nefesh abamis and two nefesh alikis. Why does the Mittler Rebbe say it's two divine souls against one animal soul? And the answer he gives is unbelievable answer. There's a halacha that says, Ein adam chayte v'loy loy, that a person does not sin for the interest of another person. They only sin for their own interest. When it comes to Elikus, you and I can join together. We do a mitzvah because Elikus is about bittul. So I will do a mitzvah even if it's not, I have no interest in it, meaning it's not for my own self-interest. So when two nefesh alikis come together, they join as one. But two nefesh abamis never really become one. They only are serving their self-interest. The only reason criminals will join together is because each one benefits. But as soon as they don't, they'll turn on each other. So really, the two nefesh abamis always remain separate, even when two people join together. So in other words, the nefesh abamis is driven by yesh, and nefesh lakis is driven by ayin. I'm just saying because it makes sense that for the nefesh lakis, so-called weakens and tears apart the yeshes, the very that self-contained egocentricity of the animal soul. I'm just putting what you said, adhesive and the cohesive works well. Yes.
Very nice.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Yeah. Like, enemy, they'll say, your enemy, what's the expression?
The enemy,
we both
the
share
enemy
the
of my
same enemy,
the enemy of my
we
enemy
become
is my
friends.
friend.
Yeah, what is it? How does it go?
The
The
enemy.
of my enemy.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's all right, Robin. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right, exactly. It's not based on real friendship. It's based on because there's an enemy. Get rid of the enemy and you may not be my friend, Right, okay. So let's continue reading inside now. I said like 7 lines from the bottom of the page. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So it says now like this. After explaining that the Sefiros of the nefesh of Ava, the love of the divine soul, Yispal, causes that also the animal soul should get inspired. And I've explained it with several examples. It's like when you see someone, I gave the example of someone who's a novice, sees an expert getting excited about something. And the novice also understands the value now, so they'll also get excited. And that's b'chol avavcha b'shnei tzerecha. So now the Rebbe Rashab continues. Shleimer, we can say, and now he's going back to analyze more the connection to Shemen. And this is in addition to what it says in Torah the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab adds the following: the nefesh abamis b'chlal nikra Shemen. That the nefesh abamis in general is called Shemen. Al shem shorshay, due to its root, the b'chinas hatoyu, rooted in the world of Tohu. Now this is explained relatively at length in the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. But the Rebbe Rashab is saying that that the nefesh abamis in general is called Shemen because it's rooted in the world of Tohu. I just want to see what he said in the previous page about this. It came from Klippas Noiga. I don't think he mentioned Tohu there, right? I don't think so. No. Oh, 1 second. Yeah, he did. He said the Shvira began in Das. In Chacham being there was no Shvira. 1 second.
He says on the top of page 1464.
Yeah. And also on the bottom of
Zav-
1463, he says that comes from the Shvira Sakem. Yeah, that did explain there the Shvira Sakelim. Yeah, the Chachma of Zah in Tohu, right? Okay, but and the Chiddush here is going to explain why is that the case. What does Tohu have to do with Shemen? So let's now go back to what the beginning of this discussion, if you remember, on the top of page 1463, he brought from Torah Eir that brings from the Pardes. If you remember, just to refresh ourselves here, that Shemen, the Pardes, the Ramak says that you can extract oil from everything, even from stones. If you look at the like 7-8 lines from the top of page 1463, everything you can extract oil from. Why? Because Shemen is the level of Chachma, and Chachma exists within everything in existence because everything was created with Chachma. That's why there's Shemen within everything, as he explained in that paragraph. The only difference is, and he said there at the bottom, if you look at the bottom of the paragraph on page 1463, this is all relevant to what we're going to read now. That's why I'm bringing it back. V'zeu she'Shemen hu ha'teichius ha'pnimius ha'mufchis shebedavar hahu. Is the innermost, is the inner and internal dimension, the choicest, we said, right? Ha'mufcher, in each item. The oil, when you say the oil of something, you know, the oil is you're bringing out the so-called the essence of something. Because every object has the entity itself, or the object, and then it has the chachma within it. That's the spark of God's mind in creating that object. What is that in Gashmias? That's the Shemen within everything. So it's like the divine source. That's the Shemen within the essence of everything. Then he explained the next paragraph that in Shemen itself, the Shemen Hateiv, Shemen HaMishcha, that's Chachma de Kedusha, like the oil in the Beis Hamikdash and so on. And then there's oil in Klippas Nega, which is all the, including olive oil and all the other types of oil. And that's the oil that is the root of Chachma, of the animal soul and human intelligence in general. Just to go back to what we learned. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain that why Shemen is so associated with the animal soul. Now, it may be Rebbe Rashab feels the need to do so. It's just speculation, because he knows what I mentioned before, that some Maimorim, Shemen is explained differently. So maybe he wants to really drive the point home why Shemen is so associated with Nefesh Habamis, more than Nefesh Halikis. He says like this now. Because on the other hand, remember, we said the Shemen of Kedusha. This wasn't discussed much here. But the Nefesh Halikis also has Chachma. The wisdom of the Nefesh Halikis is also Shemen, except it's Shemen of Kedusha. And yet here, in this example of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, we're saying Shemen is of Nefesh Habamis. So it could be that Rebbe Rashab feels the need to explain why. Why did you choose it that way? You could have said Shemen is the Shemen of Nefesh Halikis. So he says like this, because it's rooted in Tohu. Shari Hashemen shemetziyim me'ezeh davar hu ateichiz va'atzmi shalei adavar. Just quoted. He only adds the words here. There he said ateichiz va'apnimius. Apnimius. Now he says atzmis. So Shemen that you draw from anything is not just another element within that object. It's actually the core and essence of that. When you draw the oil from something, you say, I extracted the oil, the best, the choicest part of it. So he says, the tipa achas ma'ashemen, and one drop of the oil, who koyach shel tzluchis gdela ma'esa adover al derech mosel. Even one drop of oil is like the koyach, the power of a tzluchis gdela. Tzluchis is a large container. So one drop of oil qualitatively, in a sense, is more the essence of it than the entire quantity itself. So if you have, let's say, an olive, the oil of the olive, maybe olive is an obvious example, but the oil of a mineral oil, or the oil we draw out from earth, even natural oils, with natural gas or oil that we draw from the earth, it's like the best part that becomes fuel. So even though it may not be quantity as much as everything else we are drawing the oil from, whether it's from shale or whatever it may be, but the oil carries qualitatively so much power because it's the atzmis. That's what he's saying. So one drop of oil is a tremendous amount of potency. It's an example. So if you have let's say a big pot of liquid and there's one drop of oil in there, that drop of oil is like the essence of it. That's overshadows all the other parts of it. And with this, I'll explain the connection to Tohu, because Tohu is a similar idea. It's known, and now it's known. The Sefiros, the Tohu, hoya b'chinas hakeser shel kol Sefira. So the Sefiros of Tohu, we all know, are very intense. Very intense. We call Eidos Merubim, intense energy, and Kelim Mu'atim, and very fragile, we could say minimalistic and very tiny and weak containers. That's why they clash, and the tension causes the shvira, because it's not balanced yet. In Tikkun, we say the opposite. Eidos Mu'atim, the energies are more diminished, more tamed, if you wish, and the Kelim are more expanded. So therefore, it works well. But if you have too much electricity and you have very little container, it's going to burst the circuits. But the explanation for Tohu goes further than that. It's not just an imbalance. It's because Tohu is still not the final mature process of balance. What it is that each in the Sefiros of Tohu are called Kesarim. The Sefiros of Tohu are called, each sphere is called a Keser. Even though there's Chachma, and there's Bina, and there's Chesed, and there's Gvura, but they're still called Kesarim because they are very intense. So in Tohu, what's radiating very powerfully is the core of each sphere, the Ratzon, if you wish, not so much the sphere and its balanced structure, but the very intense energy within that structure. So therefore, it's like similar to what Shemen is. As it's explained elsewhere at length. So that's why the Sefiros and Atzilus and Tikkun are not called Kesarim. There's Keser, and there's a Keser of Chachma, there's a Keser of Bina. But Keser is not the dominant force. In Tohu, it's the Kesarim that are the dominant ones. And that's why it's so intense. So think of, for example, let's take our world. We know there's tremendous potent energy within every piece of matter, within every fiber of existence. But imagine atomic energy or nuclear energy was not packaged within the material package of this world. What would happen? We would be unable to exist. One nuclear explosion can create so much destruction. So it's fascinating that God took all that energy, and what did he do? He packaged it in a way that is contained. There are a lot of scientists who wonder, they don't really have it all figured out. How is it possible so much energy is limited until you create some type of fusion or fission, some reaction, some reaction that will cause either through extreme heat or through extreme speeds. But if the world is left on its own, all that energy just remains in a very potential state. similar to what's going on in the core of the earth. The heat at the core of the earth is, I don't even know the number, but it's like unbelievable temperatures. And yet, for some reason, it's able to cool. So the surface levels and all the crusts of the earth and all its levels, we don't feel that heat. Even though there are places you have a geyser or a volcano and so on, you suddenly realize how much heat there is in there. So in other words, the world is essentially bottled energy that's so intense, but thank God it's structured Eiris B'Kalim. And the Kalim make sure to keep the Eir at bay, that it shouldn't just explode. In Tohu, however, it's not yet developed yet. So what you have there is the intensity is more powerful, and the Kalim are still weak. They're not developed yet. And as such, so on one hand, it's a very high level. On the other hand, it's not you can't live in it because it's essentially an unstable environment because of this tremendous amount of energy. I mean, similar to when scientists describe the Big Bang or earlier states in history where they say the energy was so intense that you couldn't have anything that was, it could be nothing could exist yet. Either there was tremendous heat or tremendous light, it would be, so the development of something is dependent also to make sure you have the right boundaries, that there's the Keli is able to contain whatever energy is within it. So in Tohu, you're talking about the intensity, the core intensity of something. That's what Tohu is. So B'Mela, since the Nefesh Abamis, it's going to spell it out, but I'll just spell it out right now, is rooted in Tohu. So Tohu is essentially like the Shemen within everything in existence, the core essence. That's why he's saying the Nefesh Abamis is connected to Shemen. But he's going to say more about this. But that's the brief explanation. It's a pretty fascinating topic as on its own. But before I read on, does anyone want to ask anything?
Yes. So when we always say that oros and tohu, oros merubos and kalim but miutim, really, isn't it with the Rebbe here saying that it's not quantity of the oros, it's the quality, the etzem, the unique power of it doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be the shemen is just the atzmius of it. So why wouldn't the term be the atzmius of oros is in Keser and or overpower the kelim miutim?
Well, first of all, the word merubim can mean both kamos or echus. Meruba just means much. You can touch quality. So meruba doesn't necessarily mean only quantity. Second of all, it also happens to be that the Eiris and Tohu are also quantitatively more. And this is explained in volume 1, the end of volume 1 of Ayin Beis, where he discussed Tohu and Tikkun at length. He spoke about this, the points of the Eiris of Tohu, both the kamos and echus, quantity and quality. Here he's focusing on the quality because it's the quality that is this intensity. But it's correct. It can be both. One of the examples of Eiris the Tohu are the students of Rabbi Akiva that loy nogu koved zeh b'zeh. They didn't honor each other, and thus they died in a megefa. They self-destroyed, even though they were talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, because they were so intense in their positions and their learning, they couldn't tolerate the other, and they didn't respect each other. That's an example. So their intensity was, number one, was simply each one of them was extremely aggressive and very adamant about their position. That's quality. But also quantity-wise, they're probably filled with a lot of, they didn't have room for anyone else. So that's just one of the manifestations of it. There are other examples of it, but so that's the twofold answer. Yeah.
That point, thank you. That's cleared up for me. That point about you said the core of the earth, that's fascinating because, and you always think of atomic energy, as you said, the power in one cell.
Right. Not hearing you. Okay.
It's, it's not far from us.
We weren't able to hear you.
Oh,
You were saying something about the core of the earth.
yes, the core of the earth. You always think of the power. Your point that the incredible power contained in one atom. So as like that, the Nebuchadnezzar keys has such power, but how come we don't feel it? It's concealed. And look at the atom, how it conceals the incredible power of atomic energy and the physical. And then you brought up the core of the earth, which I never thought about really. And you're saying, and it turns out that the core of the earth is 9,000 to 12,000 degrees here Fahrenheit. It's the hottest thing we know. They say it's the same heat as the heat of the sun.
Can you imagine? Yeah,
it's here. It's here. I mean, it's
it's right here, exactly, beneath our feet.
We're walking on it. Well, it's underneath our feet, but we don't feel it because of the concealments of the earth and how the heat travels.
Well, these are great examples of how deep the Tzimtzum can be, how Kalim can really conceal.
Yes, look at that. But also how much power is going to be released when we have the Gula, how these powers are going to be released.
Yeah, these examples from physics are tremendous examples when you want to talk to people about their potential. When people, and they say, you know how much potential you have. Imagine you're working on the earth where it's like 70 degrees, nice, beautiful day. Well, just a few miles down, it's 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You understand? So imagine how much power you have if you unleashed your potential,
Incredible. Thank you. That's a good marshal. That's wow.
It's amazing. There's so much heat inside the earth, that there's fire inside the earth.
I didn't know it was equivalent to the sun. Is that, wow, that's amazing.
It is.
That's like, because the sun, if the sun were 100 miles closer to earth, they say we couldn't exist, And here we have a sun right beneath us that's like just miles away. How deep is the earth? I mean, what are we talking about? Not many miles.
Yeah, the sun is tail.
Yeah. Well, yeah. There's a lot to learn from all this. So let's read on here. V'zehu, says the Rebbe Rashab in the parentheses. And this is V'rav Tfuas B'Koyach Sheir. So this is a verse that means that the power of the ox that plows the earth, creates Rav Tfuas, much produce. Basically, it's saying that when a human being, let's say, plows the earth, we're much weaker. We don't have that strength. So we can plow the earth a certain amount that will yield a certain amount of produce. But Koyach Sheir, which was traditionally used throughout the agricultural societies, today we have bigger, even more powerful machines, obviously. So Rav Tfuah is B'Koyach Sheir. It's a way of pointing out how much tfuah, how much produce can be yielded through the power of a sheir. Sheir is the behemoth, referring to the world of Tohu. It has much more intensity, much more power. And then the Rebbe Rashab brings yet another example. U'kamoy b'mashke, asensia ma'arvim menu ma'ad b'mashke acheres u'mesakne. Okay. So, looking for the right. So, you have sometimes the expression you find in liquids, the essence of something, the essences. That's actually the word used, essence. That we extracted the essence of vanilla extract, for example. You'll find many foods, the flavoring or other things it's just concentrate, like orange concentrate or something like that. So they extract, they call the essence of it. So you don't have that pure, the way it is in its whole form. You're just taking out that pure essence of it. So in Yiddish, there's a word called essentia. That's like the same as essence. So he's saying, so you find in drinks, b'mashka, essentia ma'arvim memenu, the essence of a drink. So let's say you'll want to mix into a cup of vodka. You want to mix a certain lemon or something like that, or lime, or some other. So you'll mix the essentia ma'arvim memenu from it ma'at, a little of it only, in the mashke, in the liquid that you're drinking. The mashka acheres u'mesakne, and that will essentially give it flavor or transform it. This can be used also in medicine and many different places. You find this concept where there's one drink made up of certain ingredients, but then you want to either sweeten it or you want to add some type of another element. So you'll put one drop, just one drop, and it changes the complexion, it changes the makeup of that thing. But what kind of drop? You want a drop that's an essence, because the essence will do it. If you take a drop of water, it's not going to do it. So you need to have something that comes from the essence. Oil, for example, is a very good example. One drop of oil will affect anything that it goes into. You see that all the time. So what he's trying to emphasize here is the intensity of something is not about how much it is, but the intensity is the core essence of it. Kamoy Kain, that's the example. What is it in the nimshal, in the moral? Kamoy Kain b'chol birer koyach ma nefesh abamis miseisev harbe ba nefesh alikis. That the nefesh abamis, because it comes from this intense place called Tohu, so it has that power of the animal that is much stronger than the human power. So therefore, it through every time you somewhat refine or harness is a good word, harness the animal power of the animal soul, it adds tremendous amount of oil into the nefesh alikis. Now the truth is, this is a central theme of what we've been learning in general. Here it's a parenthesis, because here he's not coming to emphasize that point. We'll get to that, how the nefesh abamis increases the nefesh. That's the whole shcheda and even nova. We learned that is the concealment of the animal soul that draws out the deepest strengths of the divine soul. But here he wants to focus more on explaining why it's shemen. So you see why the animal soul is like shemen, is like the essence of everything. That's the real. All this is coming to explain why it's shemen. The yesh lemer. Okay. V'zehu, after the parentheses, and this is the meaning. Shanefesh abam is b'chal nikra shemen. Why the animal soul is called shemen. Shu koyach atzmi, because it's a very core power. And let me just make this clear. The animal can go both directions. You can harness the animal and plow fields and produce a tremendous amount of vegetation or whatever, or fruit or grain or whatever it will produce. But the animal can also go the other direction. If it's not harnessed, it also has tremendous power, can cause a lot more damage than a human being, because human beings just simply doesn't have that much strength. So going back to the human being, let's talk about the animal soul before it's harnessed. Look how powerful it is. All you got to do is look in the mirror. We don't even have to look in the mirror. Just think about when your animal soul is active, look how powerful it is, how hard it is to resist. The nefesh alikis is a very powerful force, but it doesn't compete with the animal soul, not in this world. In the Gan Eden, in the spiritual worlds, there is no nefesh abamis like that. But in this world, look at the power. So you realize this, that where is it coming from? How does the nefesh abamis have the ability? Let's say you are right now, you're inspired by learning Ayin Beis. You're davening, you're learning, you're doing mitzvahs. Then suddenly a taiva comes up. We're talking about a powerful desire, temptation. Look what it does. It can completely consume you. You get obsessed, and you almost like can't resist it. Obviously, we have the power of self-control, but we know how strong it can be. A moment of anger, a moment of frustration, it suddenly takes control of our lives. Where's such power coming from? It's so intense. And why can't the nefesh alikis simply quiet it down easily? Why does it take so much work? And why do we fail so often? So now we have an answer to all these questions, because nefesh abamis is not coming from nowhere. It has tremendous power. It has the essence of the oil and the essence of everything. So yeah, on one hand, it can be very destructive. But if you harness it, it's tremendous potency that it unleashes. That's the shemen that feeds the animals, the divine soul, and not only feeds it, makes it far stronger than it would ever have been on its own. So just drive home that point about the nefesh habamis.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, let me just finish a full sentence here. 1 second. Okay. I'll stop here until before we continue. Go ahead. Yeah.
So all this makes absolute, complete, perfect sense to me, and obviously is part of what drives the purpose of us being human, and the neshama coming down here. It's a source of fuel for birurin of the whole world. The sakinas oilam. But okay, so I'm not coming to challenge it, God forbid. But the question is, like in Tanya, it says that Sitra Achra is fueled, or the I don't know, that I can't put the right words, but it's fueled, it's sourced, that its energy comes from Acharaim. It's coming from the backside of the Koach Eloki. So it seems a little inconsistent. Like on the one hand, it has so much power, even more power that it can distract Nefesh Elokis. On the other hand, and you're the master of the words. I'm sorry I don't get the verbiage right, but something about the Sitrachos coming. Where is its strength? That it's coming Ma'acharaim. So that seems like it's kind of getting from the backside of what the ultimate source of power is.
Okay, it's a fair question. I think you can come up with an answer if you gave it some thought, frankly. But if you want, I'll answer. It's a good question. But think about it for a moment. The reason, there's two things with the Nefesh Habamis. One is its tremendous power, which we talked about here now. But there's another thing. How is it possible for it not to be acknowledging God? Everything was created by God. So why is the Nefesh Habamis going off in its own self-interest and self-indulgence and self-pleasure or self-preservation? The answer is because it's concealed. So the Tanya is coming to explain the concealed part. What causes the concealment means it's coming from Acharayim, because it's not coming from the Pnimius. So Nefesh Habamis doesn't feel its source. It feels I'm powerful, and that's that. That's number one. So there's two aspects here. One is this tremendous power that's coming from Tohu, this intensity. The second is also concealed. It's not obvious until the Nefesh Elokis educates it otherwise. A second point, if you look in Tanya, it gives the example of someone that throws something over their shoulder. Like if you want to give a gift to someone that you love, you don't throw it over your shoulder. You go over to them and you give it to them. If you throw it over your shoulder, means it's like they're not. It's like a certain they've fallen into disfavor, not something that you directly. But Hashem wants klippos to exist because that's part of this world to conceal the divine. So he has to. So he has to. He wants to give energy there, but he can't give it like you'd give it to someone you love. So he's like giving it almost begrudgingly. It's not the right word, obviously, because if God doesn't want to give it, he won't give it. But he's giving it in a way like saying, I'm giving you energy, but this energy is not for you. It's because I know you can, when you'll be harnessed, you'll fulfill a deeper purpose. It's not just, but bottom line is because it's coming in such a tzimtzum way, so that's why it's called Acharayim. It's coming in a very diminished way. Diminished in context of divine awareness, not diminished in context of pure brute strength. That's the key thing to remember.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Rabbi,
So
sorry.
So yes, so it's an interesting twist. On one hand, the Nefesh Habamis has tremendous power because it's coming from such a high level. On the other hand, it has tremendous lack of awareness because it's coming in such a concealed fashion. In a way, this explains Yaakov and Esav. Why Esav was the firstborn, and he was a warrior. He was more powerful than Yaakov, but he was not harnessed, and he was not aware, and he used it the wrong direction. You need Yaakov you need the neshama to guide the body and the animal soul to do the right thing. Think of a ship and a captain. The ship is more powerful than the captain, but you don't want the ship telling the captain where to go. You want the captain telling the ship where to go.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Really nice. I was just thinking the goof. The head is the muscles of the head or whatever, its own physical power is very limited compared to the feet or the legs.
Exactly.
But it can't get anywhere without the legs and the lower part of the body.
Right. But
Right?
you need the head to guide that.
To guide it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or I often say, then who's running the show? Is your body telling your soul what to do? Or is your soul telling your body what to do?
That's the whole question of life. The whole purpose of Chassidus is to make sure the head can drive, the body, Mashal at the lev, and in general, the head is like. Well, we could go on and on with Mashal. Anyway, sorry, Robin, please go ahead.
I was gonna bring the Esav and Yaakov example, but I was thinking as you were talking that it's almost as if Hashem made it so strong to give us the benefit of conquering, being able to conquer something so powerful that he didn't have to do it that way, right? So we can get, I mean, this maybe seems a little silly, but we can feel like we've really accomplished something when we do take over and harness that power and not let it drive us and do it the other way around.
Yeah.
This is not, just what occurred to me. It's not really deep or anything.
No, I understand. I think this is a good place to stop. Not that we finished the topic, but it's a whole topic of its own. We just learned. So I think it's good to digest this, and then we'll continue in the next class tomorrow. We'll talk about, going to come back to how the Shemen and the Psila work together. So this is more a focus on the Shemen, very interesting piece. And actually, when you learn the Torah, you really see how much the Rebbe Rashab adds to the Torah. Torah says it, that the Shemen is the animal soul, and does say that the Shemen is you find in everything, within everything, but now it's much deeper in understanding the Nefesh Habamit's connection with it. So that's a very interesting addition here. Yeah. You remember seeing Yitzchak in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, any reference to what we just learned about Shemen Tohu? Because it sounds like from the Yesh Leimer that's the Rebbe Rashab's addition. Just wondering if the Mittler Rebbe at all talked about it. Do you remember seeing anything?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, because that's where I asked my question to you personally directly about the source of Nefesh Behemoth coming from. Yeah, well, no, even before that, I asked you a question about Tohu. I can try and point it out to you if you give me a second.
Okay, it's fine. I'll look it up, but just wondering if you saw something. Yeah, okay.
I did. I did. I'll try and find it, even if you, after the recording, I can.
Fine, you can just post the page number if you find it.
Sure. Well, it's interesting, by the way, I like your example, Marshall, of shale oil, because at first blush, when the Rebbe Rashab says that you can get oil out of anything, even a stone, like at first blush, the modern mind says, "What are you talking about?" When you think about shale oil and other types of
and also mineral oil. There's mineral oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Fracking. What do you think fracking is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
it's fascinating because it really fits in with the idea that of that chokhmah and everything. And now that I think of it, maybe you could develop, based on this, they can find oil in all kinds of new things that they haven't found oil yet.
Probably so.
So it's interesting. At the core of the earth, we have 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. You go a little higher, it cools off, and then you have oil that you find deep in the earth. And then you go even higher, and we have oil wells, and then we have cars and vehicles guzzling oil up on earth. Interesting, right? And the goal is to turn it back into a fire of Hashem. think we have here layers, the crusts of the earth are a good example of the whole Avodah. It begins with fire, turns into oil. The oil then has to be pumped and tapped into. We draw it out of everything in existence, and we turn it into a Ner Hashem. Yeah, that's nice.
When the Rebbe says that everything's made with chachma, kulam b'chachma yasisa, but is all the Sefiros is in everything, right? All the
So
Sefiros.
go back. He qualified it when he explained it. He talked about it on page 1463. Talked about all the spheres, what the difference is between Chachma and the other spheres.
I can't do it now.
But it is correct, right? That everything has all the Sefiros, and it's not just
Not necessarily. Look what he says there. He talks about it explicitly.
Okay, look it over.
He doesn't say kulam babina sisa.
Right, a siso might be that Chachma makes it, but nimsa, that it appears that it's there. It's
Go
present.
there. He talks about it explicitly. I'm telling you, he addresses it directly.
Okay.
He says clearly that not everything has Chachma, and not everything has all the spheres in it.
Wow. Okay, it's interesting.
All the spheres exist in everything, but not like Chachma. You'll see there. He explains it.
Okay. By the way, the crust.
So we'll stop here at bottom of page 1465, literally the last line.